Hey guys, I'm Ava, and let's talk about Yu-Gi-Oh! Specifically a budget deck, a Dino budget deck in fact, and we will be deciding whether it is meta and viable at locals or just meh. Even though it's a budget deck, we want to be frugal with our money, and we don't want to buy things that we don't need, and we don't want to be playing with a losing deck, of course. So we will be evaluating this deck by looking at the deck profile, just talking about it really quickly, and then we will be running some test hands because I think this will give us a really good picture of how viable this actually is rather than, say, a one-off duel. We want to see how consistent it is, what our odds of breaking are, and just overall how it feels when you get that first hand, what you're able to do. Can we execute our main combo? I will be showing you guys what our main combo is and hopefully how we can execute it smoothly. Of course, this depends on what our opponent is playing as well. This deck doesn't do too well against interference, so let's see how it goes. I sourced this deck from Reddit, specifically the Yu-Gi-Oh! Subreddit, more specifically the October 2021 Budget Deck Master Post. They post these every 3 to 6 months, and they're a super useful resource. They have a bunch of decks listed in all sorts of archetypes, and you can just download the .ydk file to import it, and then you can just play it as I am doing here. So let's get into this deck profile and get started. First up, we have Soul Eating Oviraptor. This is the one you really want to open on, and that's why there are 3 copies of it in the deck. You can also search for it with our 3 copies of Fossil Dig, so that doubles your chances as well. You will use this card to search for Miscellaneous Saurus, and you can add that to your hand, which will allow you to activate its effect by discarding it to the graveyard. You can negate all of your opponent's effects towards your Dino monsters for the rest of the turn, which is really helpful for getting your combo out, because as I said, this deck isn't always super helpful when it comes to hand traps. So after you get that in the graveyard, it also has another ability whereby you can banish it, and assuming you're only banishing 1 card, you can summon a level 1 monster. So for this deck, that's going to be our Animadorned Archosaur. It's only running 1 copy, which I think might be a shortcoming of this deck, because I think it could definitely stand for 2. 3 might be too many, but because this card did get reprinted and is fairly cheap, I don't see why you wouldn't run 2 copies of it. So this card will let you destroy 1 monster. Specifically note that it says destroy, because that will be useful later. It will let you destroy 1 card. In exchange, you can add a Dino to your hand, or the more useful thing is Evolution Pill, which we can add. So this will help us get to our boss monster, which is Ultimate Conductor Tyranno, fairly easily. All you have to do is banish a Dino and non-Dino card from your hand or graveyard, making it pretty useful. Now, the fact that it says destroy is actually really useful for us because we have Petite Pteranodon and Baby Stegosaurus. These both have really good effects, but they specifically have to be destroyed by card effect. You can note that in both of their descriptions, and a lot of cards aren't going to do that, otherwise you have to have them on the field, but Archosaur lets you get around that, and then you will be able to use them to special summon cards from your deck, level 4 or lower for Baby Stegosaurus, and level 4 or higher for Petite Pteranodon. Note that you can't use this to get out your Ultimate Conductor Tyranno, however it does work for Dino Wrestler Pankratops, which is another great card. Unfortunately, it got limited to 1, just like Miscellaneous Saurus. The fact that Miscellaneous Saurus got limited like that was actually a really big hit to the deck and kind of affected the consistency. However, with 1 copy, it still runs okay, I will say. Especially because in our extra deck, we have a few cards that will let us retrieve it after being banished. Next up, we have Scrap Raptor, and this is one of the things that concerns me about this deck profile. I don't think this is very strong when you're just running Scrap Raptor and Scrap Golem. Your goal, by the way, is to use Scrap Wyvern, but without Scrap Chimera, which this deck would typically run in a non-budget version, it's just like not that powerful. However, I see why that card's not included because it's about $50. Basically, these cards let you recycle them over and over and will help you get more materials on the field. A lot of the time, people will use Baby Stegosaurus to get out your Scrap Raptor, which you can use its own effect to destroy it, and it will let you add another scrap card. It will also be helpful for when you want to get out your Scrap Wyvern. You can use that as material for that. A lot of the times people will use Baby Stegosaurus or Petite Pteranodon to get out Scrap Raptor because it is material for Scrap Wyvern, which does require a scrap monster. This is definitely the better one to use for that as opposed to Scrap Golem. So next up we have our boss, which is Ultimate Conductor Tyranno. This deck is pretty great because the extra deck is really flexible since our main boss monster is in the main deck. It's really helpful. This deck is running 2 copies, which I think is okay. However, I do think you can run 3, and I don't think it would be excessive, but it depends on your personal preference. So this card is summoned by banishing 2 dinosaur-type monsters from your graveyard, which is actually pretty reasonable to achieve just by the effects of all of these cards. You can use Scrapraptor's effect to send it to the graveyard. Baby Cerosaurus, its effect is activated by being sent to the graveyard, which you can do with Animadorned Archosaur, and Soul Eating Oviraptor will also let you send a dinosaur monster to the graveyard. So you have a lot of options there how to execute that. This guy is pretty beefy and his effect is very solid. Basically, you can destroy a monster. Again, note it says destroy 1 monster in your hand or field. So again, we could play this with our Baby Cerosaurus to get some synergy there. And if you do, you can change all face-up monsters your opponent controls to face-down defense position. And it can also attack all of those defense position monsters once per turn, which when you have 3500 attack is pretty good. It should also be noted that with this card, when you attack a defense position monster, you can deal 1000 damage, so you'll still be able to get some damage in when you do that. Pankratops is a great way to destroy a card. It's very easy to get out, and it's a good option. If you don't have any cards, it's kind of like a Cyber Dragon, but with some added bonuses. Next up, we have Fantastical Dragon Phantasme, which is a pretty standard card. This is going to be one of our hand traps. However, this is another concern I have with this deck. As you can see, it doesn't come with any side decking cards. Obviously, you can choose your own, but without having the side deck built in, as we will be playing today, you have no option but to play this. And if you aren't playing a deck that uses link monsters, for example, if you're playing against Virtual World, you won't be able to use this card. So that's just kind of dead in the water. Next up, we have our other hand trap, which is Effect Veiler. This card is a very cheap hand trap, and that's basically why it's in the deck. If you have other hand traps, I think that you could definitely substitute those out, as this one isn't necessarily the best if you do have Ash Blossom, because I know a lot of people, even budget players, do have a playset of that. You could definitely add that in. Next up, we have Psyframe Gear Gamma and Psyframe Driver. These cards, again, also standard hand traps, lets you get something out on the field. Next up, we have Fossil Dig. This is what's going to let us get to our combo more easily and increase the chances of pulling what we want on our first turn, and basically increases the consistency of the deck overall. Next up, we have Lost World, which really helps make this deck. It is a very powerful field spell, and as you can see, 3 copies are being ran, but it's effectively 4 with the addition of Terraforming. And that's just to increase the odds of getting it because it is so good. So the first effect of this card is that it will decrease the attack and defense of all non-dinosaur monsters on the field. Note that this does include your own. However, every time you special or normal summon a dino, you can place a token on your opponent's side of the field. The really cool thing about this is that while they have a token by Lost World's effect, they can only target tokens with card effects, which will help make your dinos immune. This is super useful because, as I said, the dino deck doesn't have a lot of options if your opponent disrupts your combo. This will be really helpful for preventing that. And because we're running effectively 4 copies, hopefully this can be out relatively consistently during the game. Also, when this card is out, if a normal monster would be destroyed by battle or card effect, you can instead destroy a dino from your hand or deck. I think you guys already know where this is going because, as we said, Baby Cerosaurus, Petite Pteranodon both have great effects when they are destroyed, so we will be able to get those out very easily, and we can basically attack that. And a great option is with Ultimate Conductor Tyranno, because you'll be able to deal that 1000 points of damage. If you choose to destroy your one dino, that will also keep the token on the field, so you will be able to continue having your opponent's options limited because they won't be able to target your dinos with their effects. Next up, we have Dark Ruler No More, which is pretty much a staple spell card. We are able to negate the effects of our opponent's monsters until the end of this turn, which lets us execute our combo hopefully more easily. Obviously, you can't deal damage this turn, but I think you can wait until next turn to do that just with these cards. Then we have Double Evolution Pill, which we've already talked about, and last up we have Called by the Grave, which is a pretty standard quick play spell. Finally, we have our extra deck. It is a pretty standard extra deck and also pretty flexible. We have our Psyframe Lord Omega. This card is pretty useful. You can target a banished card and return it to the graveyard, which is going to be useful for our Miscellaneousaurus. We also have Logia, Dolka, Tornado Dragon, Abyss Dweller, number 60, Appaloosa. We're running Nightmare in this. We have Unicorn, Phoenix, and Cerberus. We also have Heat of the Fire Charmer Ablaze, Scrap Wyvern, which we've already talked about. Pentastack's going to be really good in this with our Ultimate Conductor Tyranno, because you can activate his effect to flip all of your opponent's monsters to face down defense position, and then if you have Pentastack out, he can attack all of them but for piercing damage, as well as an additional 1000 on top of that, which is very solid and could be an OTK. We also just have Secure Gardna and Linkuriboh. If you are in a tight spot, you can get these out. If you're in a tight spot, you can get out Secure Gardna and Linkuriboh, but hopefully that won't be necessary, because hopefully we will be able to control the game. So without further ado, let's do a couple test hands and I will show you what we draw, whether or not we'll actually be able to execute that combo on our first turn or not, because we want to see if this deck is consistent. Okay, so first up on our first draw, we have Baby Ceratosaurus, Petite Pteranodon, Giant Rex, Dark Ruler No More, and Called by the Grave. I'm not going to go through full duel, really just the first turn on this. So this really isn't a great hand to start on. You don't want to just pull Baby Ceratosaurus and Petite Pteranodon with nothing to activate. So we don't have any card that can destroy them by card effects, so I would say that this hand is kind of a brick. The first turn you'd probably just want to set your Called by the Grave. You could potentially play Giant Rex in attack position, or you might be better off just setting a card. Hopefully you can set a card and hope that they activate an effect to destroy it, and then you can execute your Baby Ceratosaurus or Petite Pteranodon. But overall, for a first turn, I would say that this is a bit of a brick. So let's go to our second hand and see if we get something better. Okay, so we have our second hand here. This is a decent opening. We're going to start with Lost World. Then we are going to put out our Scrap Raptor. It's really our only option. We are going to activate the effect of Lost World to summon a card to our opponent's side of the field. Let's assume we're going first, so we can't attack. That will make this a bit harder for us, but we're going to activate the effect of Scrap Raptor and destroy it. Then we should be able to source ourselves another scrap card, which is going to be Scrap Golem. Sadly, we can't summon it, and this hand is a bit of a brick. So you can see this is really where this runs out. If we had been able to attack, we would have done so, which would have allowed us to trigger Lost World's effect, but we can't. You could have just left this on the field or set it, but I thought this would be a bit more interesting. We have no way of getting another dinosaur in our graveyard this turn, so we are locked out here. Let's go to hand number 3 and see if we can get our combo. Okay, here is hand number 3. We have ourselves a Baby Ceratosaurus, a Dark Ruler No More, a Lost World, Psyframe Gear Gamma, and Fantastical Dragon Phantasme. This deck is really hard when it comes to going first. You really need to have a Soul Eating Oviraptor or a Fossil Dig, but we have neither. We only have our Baby Ceratosaurus and our Lost World. We're going to activate Lost World, of course. Of course, we're going to activate our Lost World. So we have our Psyframe Gear Gamma and our Fantastical Dragon Phantasme, which is pretty dookie when it comes to going first. We aren't going to be able to use these for anything. We can get out our Baby Ceratosaurus and set it and hope for the best next turn, but that's about all we can do. Let's go to hand number 4, and I think you guys are going to see the pattern that is emerging, that this deck is hard when it comes to going first. Okay, now we have our Petite Pteranodon, an Effect Veiler, Psyframe Gear Gamma, and Baby Ceratosaurus. So first, we will summon our Scrap Raptor. We are going to be boned this turn as well, but we will just activate its effect so you can see how it would work. That goes to the graveyard, we activate its effect, and we get our Scrap Golem. We are locked out, that's the end of the turn. We give it to our opponent, and we restart for our next hand. Alright, we have a good hand here. Well, decent. So we have our Double Evolution Pill. We have our Scrap Raptor. So this turn we can get out Ultimate Conductor Tyranno pretty easily. Let's play Scrap Raptor as our normal summon, I think. Not for any particular reason, but it's the only one that makes sense. We're going to send it to the graveyard anyway, so it'll be usable for Double Evolution. And it goes to the grave. We will get our Scrap Golem. Then we activate our Double Evolution, which will be using our Scrap Golem and our Scrap Raptor. That is the benefit of having your Scrap Golem. We could use any of these. Honestly, Psyframe Driver might be our better choice because we might want the effect of Scrap Golem. Almost certainly not, but why not have it in the hand anyway? Let's go for our Psyframe Driver. And we are, of course, choosing our Ultimate Conductor Tyranno. This is a bit of a weaker opening because we were hoping to get, a couple monsters out on the field, but this definitely isn't bad. So you can also play Dark Ruler No More like we just did here, and you'll just be ready for the next turn. Now we also have our Cyframe Gear Gamma in hand, so we have a decent hand trap. This card isn't super useful right now, but we may want it later. And we can't attack this turn, but if our opponent had any monsters out, we can destroy one monster in our hand. We could use Scrap Golem for that, right? Okay, so this hand was solid. Let's go to one more hand. I want to get a full combo out, but if I can't get it in 5 turns, I think we're just going to give up. Okay, we have ourselves Double Evolution Pill, Baby Cerosaurus, Ultimate Conductor Tyranno, Called by the Grave. So this is weak. I think we're locked out in this hand as well. This deck could be a lot more consistent with the right cards. I don't think they're there though, and I think our hand traps are kind of limiting. I think Ash Blossom would be useful for Double Evolution Pill because it gives us a non-dinosaur type card, which we don't have here unfortunately, so we can't activate that. We would set our Called by the Grave, probably set Dark Ruler No More. We would set Double Evolution Pill. So that's basically all we can do. We would set our Baby Cerosaurus just so we have some sort of defense. That's the end of our turn. Very weak turn 1, but hopefully our opponents aren't perfect and we could beat them. Okay, I've drawn like 13 hands now, just trying to get to an ideal hand to show you guys what this combo could really look like at full power. So first up, we are going to activate our Lost World, which will give us some insurance by summoning our Soul Eating Oviraptor. We will be able to activate Lost World to summon a token, which will be greatly beneficial, and we can use his effect to search Miscellaneousaurus. So we have our token out. Our monsters can't be targeted, but we want extra insurance. So we're going to send Miscellaneousaurus to the graveyard. This seems redundant in terms of that effect, but it actually isn't, because this card states that it targets them specifically, whereas Miscellaneous says they are unaffected, and not all cards state that they're specifically targeting a monster, so those ones would probably be able to get around Lost World, but not Miscellaneousaurus, so we are going to activate its second effect to get ourselves an Animadorned Archosaur. Here we go. He's going to get summoned in defense position just because. We are going to activate his effect, and we are going to send our Baby Cerosaurus to the graveyard, which will also let us trigger Baby Cerosaurus's effect to special summon a card from our deck. We are going to go for probably Scrap Raptor, because then we can do our Scrap Engine, which I just think probably the best choice. So we are going to do our Scrap Raptor. Okay, so we have Scrap Raptor out. We're going to be able to get Ultimate Conductor Tyranno this turn, so that's pretty cool. So first we're going to activate the effect of our Scrap Raptor. We are going to destroy it, which will allow us to search Scrap Golem, which is going to give us the material for our Double Evolution Pill. Now we have a non-dino card that we can use as fuel. So we are going to do Double Evolution, and we are going to banish a Scrap... we're going to banish a Baby Cerosaurus and our Scrap Golem. And the big boy is out. So this combo, you can see we've got our Ultimate Conductor Tyranno. All right, we have these 2 cards out. We could Fossil Dig a 3rd card, but I think we want to keep that just in case. I think, let's say we are going to summon Pentastag, just for this example. This is going to show you what we will be able to do next turn. So next turn, we would be able to use our Ultimate Conductor Tyranno to attack for piercing damage, and if our opponent has any defense position monsters, which we can ensure they will by Ultimate Conductor's effect, as you can see, this card will inflict piercing damage plus 1000 for each defense position monster. And because its attack is 3500, there's a decent chance that even if your opponent only has 2 monsters, you'll probably be able to end the game by destroying them all with Ultimate Conductor Tyranno and dealing an extra 1100 with Pentastag. So that is an example of an ideal hand for this deck. As you can see, we had so many options. We could have used Fossil Dig to search for another level 4, and we could have done an XYZ summon. But just for simplicity, we stuck with Pentastag. I think you guys can see from the hands that I drew that this deck really suffers from consistency. I think a few cards could be swapped out to make this deck more viable and much more consistent on the first opening. I also think that it needs more hand traps. If you have other hand traps, definitely give this an option. I think Fantastical Phantasme is a really breaky card in terms of this deck, because we really need to be drawing into our Soul Eating Oviraptor or our Fossil Dig or something like that. And also, of course, you can side deck. You can put this card in the side deck. You could run 1 or 2 copies in the main deck, but I think 3 is too many. You could replace the Effect Veiler with something else. If you have the Scrap Chimera, that would also be really good. I think the Scrap Engine right now, as it is a bit weak. So I think this is kind of a weak spot of this deck. Overall, though, I think it has a lot of potential. The Ultimate Conductor Tyranno is a really great boss, and this deck really offers a lot of flexibility with the extra deck, which is really good for budget players because you don't need to have certain specific cards to make this deck work. The boss monster of this card is in a structure deck, so it is very cheap, and overall the deck itself is very cheap as well. And Dino Rustler, Pankratops, and Miscellaneous Source have been limited to 1, so it's a bit cheaper but also a bit weaker. That definitely does affect the consistency of this deck, I would say. Miscellaneous Source at 1 is still okay, but I would love to go back to 2. So overall, I would probably say this deck as it is meh. But I think with the right alterations, it could be meta, especially at locals. I don't know how you'll do at a bigger tournament, but I think with some modifications, this deck could potentially be working okay for you at locals. But as I said, as it stands, so I'm giving this deck a meh rating for 2 main reasons. The first being that it is inconsistent. You are very likely to draw a brick in this deck, as I showed you with those hands. Second, even if you don't brick, you are very likely to get locked out of your combo. This deck does not prevent that stuff very well because it does not have a lot of great hand traps. So if you are going on your first turn and you get locked out, you are kind of boned. This could be through an Ash Blossom, an Imperm. Your opponent's likely to be playing at least one of these. Most people play at least some sort of hand trap. After I finished ranting, I realized I totally forgot to do a conclusion for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and please let me know if you guys like this type of content by subscribing and commenting below. It takes a bit longer to make, but it's also really fun for me. So if you guys do like this, please subscribe to my channel. It would really mean a lot to me, and please give this video a like. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time.